This is it.
This is it. Episode 1.
Episode numero uno. Two therapists at a bar.
At a bar.
Great.
Drinking
Poppy.
Poppy.
This soda is I think it's my favorite healthy soda.
Honestly, I'd have to agree. I really like it too.
You like it?
I was.
Olipop is also good.
I mean, I really love the Olipop root beer, but this is pretty good.
Yeah. This they had the orange flavors. One of my faves.
Yeah.
But
now we'll be visiting later
yes,
Elkton Brewing, and
yes,
they've got some great kombucha on tap. So
their flavored kombuchas are just something else.
So a little shout out to our friends over at Elkton Brewing. We'll be there. At a different point in time. So.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about today?
All right, Dale. Well, I've been meaning to ask you this and get your thoughts on it because it's kind of ironic that we're two therapists at a bar, right?
And neither of us drink.
And yeah, right. That's the first. That's the first part, right? The second is this question of, are we over therapizing, right? So. You've probably clocked your 10,000 hours of therapy. Probably past that, I think.
It's
right.
I don't know if I'm quite. Well, I don't know how far I'm past it, but I'm probably about there.
Yeah. And I think I'm somewhere like 1,000. So I definitely want to hear your thoughts on some of these conversations that are being had about therapy, right? So we currently live in an age where, at least on social media, there's a lot of therapy speak.
Tell me what that means.
So the language and the vocabulary that people have started to use is a language that one would typically expect to hear in a therapy room, which wasn't there before.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So, prior to this, therapy is this thing that nobody talks about. Like, if you're in therapy, it's kind of taboo in a way. Like, back in the day, I was like, oh, are you, crazy person?
Sure.
You're unwell. But now, you talk to some of the high schoolers, like, they brag about having a therapist.
Yeah.
You know? And then on social media, trauma, gaslighting, narcissist, all these words that typically we wouldn't hear 10 years ago.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And so we've learned how to, I guess, therapize our day-to-day experiences. And I think the effect that's having is that even though there's still not as many people in therapy as you would expect, people are beginning to, I guess, tire of some of that language, and maybe it's making people think of like, okay, is therapy even worth it? Right?
What is it even doing?
Right?
So it sounds like to a degree you're saying we are over therapizing.
Hey, I mean, I just read this article, I think it was in Time magazine.
Sure.
That basically the author was asserting, like, if a treatment is provided, right, such as like the vaccinations for polio.
Sure.
If you provide more vaccinations, the incidence of polio should go down.
Sure.
So likewise, if you provide more therapy, the incidence of mental health issues should hopefully go down. But apparently the data shows that mental health crisis is only increasing.
Sure.
So that's another piece of data. Again, we're not giving numbers here, but there's this book by, I forgot her name. She wrote the book Bad Therapy. Yeah. Talking about how like kids are actually turning out to get worse.
Sure.
The more they are in therapy.
Sure.
Right? Because they end up ruminating. And
things are exacerbated.
Exactly.
They identify with their condition to such a degree that they become it. Right. They become the condition.
Right. They become the depressed person. Right. They become the anxious person.
Sure. They attach to it in such a significant way. Yeah, so I would say that perhaps the easiest thing to point out is I believe that we are over therapizing bad therapy.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So and that is not meant to put a target on therapists, right? I think most therapists are trying to do their best for the people that they work with.
Yeah.
However, I think in many cases, perhaps the intention of therapy is not understood well.
By
Both
people going into therapy?
People going in, and then perhaps even the therapist of understanding how it's perceived by the person coming in.
Okay.
Right. So some of this, I think, comes out in a disclosure, right? A good disclosure, right? So
And this, what? Yeah. So a disclosure. What is a disclosure?
Somebody walks into therapy, right? Or you could even argue that to a degree, a disclosure could even be what you might read on Psychology Today, right? All these little excerpts of, hey, here's what I'm going to do for you, or here's what I want to provide for you.
This is my style of therapy.
Yes, this is my
modality.
Style. Yes, and I would argue that many of those statements, along with some of the disclosures. Now, obviously, there's an informed consent, which says, hey, there could be risk with this, right? And I would say most people gloss over that and don't actually read that. Well, most others are going to look at, all right, what's warm and fuzzy, right? What makes me feel good, feel like I'm in a safe space? And most of those, let's say that you would read on Psychology Today, and anywhere for that matter, are going to read something to the tune of, my goal is to provide a safe, supportive environment where you can be your true, authentic self in the best way possible, in a nurturing form, right?
Right. Yeah.
For allowing full self-expression and mindfulness, right? Hey.
Yeah.
Actually,
totally.
probably some of that language is in 90% of what you're going to read.
For sure. Yeah.
And something else to the tune of, everyone goes through difficult times. I'm here to support that and support your path and journey, right?
Yeah.
And again, all good things.
Yeah, I mean, that to me, that all sounds great.
Yeah, it sounds great.
Right?
Hey, yeah.
Like, who wouldn't want a safe, supportive
kumbaya
environment, right?
Yeah. No,
right? Because it sounds like the world in itself, like, okay, the world around me seems like a difficult place to just be me, to just breathe and maybe I don't feel comfortable sharing some of my deeper, darker secrets. The stuff I've maybe gone through, the experiences I've gone through. Right? So it's like, okay, safe, nurturing. Okay, cool. Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah. So I think it is great on the outset. However, I think there's a certain part of it that's also unintentionally dishonest. I think a more helpful way to frame a disclosure, whether you tell the client when they come in the door or whether they read it, is to say that this is going to be hard. It might even be something that you question while you're in it. You may gain benefit from it. Chances are, most days you're going to wonder if there's even any point to it. However, if you do the work, if you stay on the path, what we can achieve is meaning and value. And if you're lucky, by the time you're done, you'll at least be able to take something valuable and meaningful that you didn't have before. It's a hard sell.
Dang. Wow. Okay.
Right?
I've never heard that.
Well, and so I think really what that is it's a little bit of reality. And because most people, I would say you now, granted, perhaps some will listen to this and say, well, that's really harsh, or that's not true, or I can walk into my therapist and I feel great, and I feel great when I come out after. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
How about what you went into therapy for? Did you achieve what you came out or what you searched after? Right. I think a lot of times,
which is typically healing, growth. Right. Most people go into that like, I want to be a better person than I came in.
And that's so ambiguous. Right? To say I want to be a better person. But I would say many say that, right? Yeah. And so I think good therapy focuses on being able to center in on the parts of you that are already strong and support those being strong, and hopefully be able to shed some light on the parts that aren't that well developed, right? where this can get tricky is, say the person walks in the door, and yeah, like we talk about sharing deep dark secrets, but most of us, when we share secrets, we may share a secret, but typically not one that points us in a negative light truly, or points us in a light that we are insecure over. Hopefully, if we have enough awareness, we can illustrate that idea so that we can really understand that the purpose of this is to be uncomfortable, because it's not comfortable to share that stuff with anybody, especially somebody you just met.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And so that's, I would say,
and I guess that's maybe that's why they try to market it as safe, in the sense that maybe it will be uncomfortable, but you can share it. You can share it with me, right?
And I think too, depending on perhaps the population that you're dealing with, that can also play a factor, because I think sometimes I would kind of attune this to almost a teaching environment, right? If you start with students, say, especially high schoolers, right, and you're a really easygoing teacher, you're going to be walked all over.
It's so true.
Like, if you start easygoing, you're going to be walked all over.
Yeah.
However, if you start and have your expectations clearly aligned and are very direct with making clear statements, clear expectations, and towing the line with those things, initially, people may say, well, I don't like them, or they're not that great, right? They're just a stickler, or however, in time, what happens is that they respect you, and then they love you because you're predictable. And in that predictability, you are safe. You are secure. You are clear. You are disciplined. And in that
stability.
In that discipline, in that stability, in that clarity, there is safety. And I think that's really the environment, ideally, that therapy would provide.
Okay, so
I don't think we're over-therapizing that.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of that, right? I don't hear people say they have that. What I've heard people say when they complain about therapy, because my wife and I had a podcast. We have a podcast on relationships, and we did a small segment on therapy. We invited a few psychologists to come talk about it and tell us what are the benefits, and basically we're trying to encourage our listeners, like, hey, therapy is a great thing.
Sure.
It can help you with your relationships, because our podcast was about relationships. I got a bunch of DMs, and a lot of them shared the same thing. Like, I tried therapy, right? Maybe it wasn't a good fit, which is valid. Like, we know it's usually can take time, a few tries to get a good fit, and having a therapeutic alliance with your therapist is important. Yeah. So that's valid, right? But that's not really it's not really the therapist's fault or your fault, right? The second one was, I feel like I'm just there to just dump my stories and nothing is done about it. Like, I just talk, and maybe they reflect back what I'm saying, and they listen, and that's great. But beyond that, I don't feel like I'm coming out different. Nothing is changing. Like maybe they're trying to validate me, which is helpful maybe in some ways, right? Like, a lot of people need that validation of, like, maybe your certain experiences you went through were minimized, dismissed. Sure. But then beyond that, that's it. Yeah. So what would you say to that? Like, well, is that a problem of? I think that's how therapy is being given.
So I think there's two problems with that. One is that I would ask the question to the individual: did you say what you needed?
Ooh.
Right.
Yeah.
And because chances are, I would say most therapists are I would say it's pretty likely they're gonna ask the question: what do you need? What do you think you need? Now, many may answer, well, I don't know. That's why I'm here.
Right.
So this is where I think most therapists are very cautious to be directive. And I think that comes from a very Rogerian standpoint.
Yeah. It's Rogerian.
Excuse me. So Carl Rogers.
Okay.
Right. a founder of an interpersonal style of therapy of
Mm-hmm.
of asking, or rather reflecting emotion, right? Being able to be client centered, as in the client has all the answers,
Mm-hmm.
right? They know what they need. If you just be able to allow them to show you, right? And I think that mode of therapy is one that has promulgated most of the therapists that we see today,
Yeah.
right? Because it is very attractive, it's very inviting, it's perhaps easy to sit with initially.
Right.
I would also argue, though, that there's significant limits to that, right? Because I think the whole idea of therapy initially is that if I'm going to therapy, then I have a problem with something. Obviously, right? Like, the therapist's job is perhaps to ensure that the client recognizes that you yourself, you are not the problem, but we can still have them, right? Right. So there's a difference there. But typically, standard status quo, okay, there's a problem. What are we going to do about said problem? When did it start? How does it manifest? What does it look like? How do we measure it? And maybe there's a problem that I think is the problem, but it's not the actual problem, which is why I'm going to talk to somebody about it, because I don't know what to do. And I've tried. And I'm here seeing you because I don't know what to do. Right? And so I think partially because of Rozier and style, partially also because I think people are much more concerned with, liability and lawsuits. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
If I give you advice and it's the wrong advice,
Yeah.
well, now you
Like, go break up with your girlfriend.
Yeah, now you hurt me, right? So
Right.
I think there's also a way to provide advice, but I think we'll probably talk about that later. That's a whole nother.
Yeah, that's a whole, like, yeah, should therapists give advice?
Yeah,
Right? That's a
whole nother topic.
Big question.
But I think that a lot of this over-therapizing, rather, I think also largely has to do with the expectations that are placed on a therapist and the expectations that are placed on the individual, right? So are we clearly stating what it is we need, what it is we're trying to solve, and is the therapist then being directed to say, well, you said you wanted this. This is what I see. This is what this looks like. Now, I think sometimes what happens is that when people do encounter that, they don't like that. Right? Because I would say that probably many therapists at some point, once they've built rapport, they may provide an empathetic confrontation to, hey, so you say that you really desire these things, but you also say that you do these things.
Right.
Help me understand what you would desire from that process. Right?
Right.
And that's about as gentle as we could say,
right,
confront, right?
Yeah, that motivational interviewing stuff.
Right, exactly. Right. Sometimes, though, I think there's a certain element of people that feel, in some ways, when something is tiptoed around, there's a question as to, well, why not just say it? Why not just ask me? Because after all, we're people. We like having normal conversations. I think most of us don't want to feel therapized either.
We don't want to feel therapized.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
So I think most of us don't want to feel as though someone is trying to get us to think a certain way in a really subtle form, right? Because it feels
right.
almost
Like when people are like, "Are you analyzing me?"
Yeah,
right.
right.
You know, people
like
say
it
that.
almost feels so. It may feel too directive, or even almost too gentle. And I think sometimes we buck against it. Where in certain cases, I think it can be much more simple to say, "Hey, I don't understand what you're doing right now because it doesn't really add up." That's a very simple way to say something.
Right.
Like,
right.
and or, right? Hey, yeah, I think that's a terrible idea.
Yeah. Wow.
Right? That's
Yeah.
completely different. Not
Yeah.
very therapeutic, perhaps.
Right. But it's to me, what I like about that is that it sounds like you're just having a conversation, right? Because
Yes.
in a way, like, and this is one of the things I that I'm drawn to in some modalities of therapy is that in therapy you're you're kind of practicing a new way of relating to
Yes.
other people outside of your life,
Like,
right?
One of the say other founders of modalities, Alan Beck.
Alan Beck, yeah.
Right, we think of
CBT.
Alan Beck. Yeah, so like a lot of your CBT guys or quintessential CBT guys, were very much like this, right? Mm-hmm. And, or rather, if you were to read autobiographies, very, very directive, almost crass, right, in style.
Yeah.
Right? But because they were trying to be as pragmatic as possible,
Okay.
they were trying to keep things simple and clear. Especially if we're coming from, like, say, for those of us that don't know, okay, CBT stands for cognitive behavioral therapy.
Right.
Right. So it was operating on the notion that, okay, you have thoughts, then you have action, right?
Yeah.
And so trying to disseminate, okay, where is the antecedent of certain behaviors and what happens leading up to these things? So if we can have cause and effect, we can start to be able to understand why we do what we do, right? And I think for many, it was like, well, there's more to it.
More to
it than just my action. More to my problem than just what I do. Right? And I think for CBT people, in many cases, it's like, well, yeah, but if we can eliminate the action, then what's the big deal? Do we really need to understand more? Like,
right.
If we can bring something to extinction, then what's the big deal?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And so if I can get you to stop smoking, then who the hell cares if you understanding why you're triggered in certain moments? Like, so
yeah. I mean, especially if
a legitimate
that's your
question.
Goal.
Exactly. Right. Now, granted,
and if that helps you stop smoking sustainably, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Now, where a lot of things come into play that get trickier is, okay, when it comes to trauma, when it comes to being able to articulate, well, I have these feelings and emotions about complex circumstances. Now, I think what helpful therapy would do is allow us to see how we are able to engage with the life that we've created and actually bring us into understanding how our own decisions have brought us to the point that we are at now. And perhaps to a degree, it may sound like I'm saying how it helps us take responsibility.
Right. Yeah. I feel like that's what I'm hearing. Right.
Yes.
Because
now, I'm not trying to say this in a sense of saying, well, you should be responsible for all the things that happen to you. Right. Like,
right.
Which is true to a point. But at the same time, you are responsible for what you do after.
Right. That's the big piece.
Yeah.
Right. Is that you can't change maybe what happened to you in the past.
No.
But what's going to change moving forward?
Yes.
And who's responsible for that?
Yes. And I think, so again, it may sound like I'm talking theoretically a lot about what in therapy we might consider existential theory. And I am.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
There's, okay, like
Viktor Frankl.
I'll be very clear to say, yeah, I'm on that team.
Yeah.
Like, I support that notion, right? I think it works.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I love it. I love it.
So that is an orientation that definitely I've subscribed to. It's not to say that other ones don't help.
Yeah.
But I also am going to be one of those guys that say, hey, if it works, do it. But how we evaluate whether or not it's working, I think, is a whole nother question.
Yeah. Right. And I feel like that's existential piece.
Yes.
In a way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So
looking at values.
I'm curious though for you.
Yeah.
Right. Like as like, you know, being kind of early on in the career and then like when you hear this question, like, are we over therapizing? And we heard from you earlier to say like, okay, well, yeah, it sounds like to a degree there's some elements of that. Like, what do you hear?
Yeah.
And what do you think?
Yeah. Well, so one of the fears I have as a therapist, right, is to work with a client, right? And in therapy, we call them clients, call them patients,
sure,
right? To work with an individual that is a proponent of the frustration that people feel is that there's always that maybe one friend or one family member or one coworker who's always talking about the fact that you're in therapy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But they're using therapy as an excuse to kind of justify
Their actions.
Their lack of behavior. They're processing it.
Yeah.
They're working through
I'm
it.
doing the hard work.
They're doing
right
the EMDR. They're doing the trauma work.
Yeah.
They're doing the, you know what I'm saying?
You don't understand. I have
Yeah.
repressed trauma.
Yeah, you don't understand. Yeah, exactly. And the people who are not in therapy
Yeah.
are like, dude, this therapy thing, like, you just use it as an excuse. And there's that comedian I showed you, Hassan Minaj.
Yeah, that was a great clip.
Yeah, where
That
he
was a great
talks
clip.
about how his friend is not paying him back, and he's
Sure.
using all these like therapy speak.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, I don't need you to process. I need you to change.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
I need you to change, man. And that's where I feel like a lot of people get frustrated because, like, you know, I feel like in many ways comedians they speak to the culture.
Sure.
Right? Like, people laugh. They're like, dude, that's relatable.
Sure.
Like, everyone knows that person.
Sure.
Who doesn't take accountability, yet they're in therapy.
Sure.
Right?
Yes.
And then one of the things Hassan Minaj says is like therapy should be like a haircut. You don't tell people you went,
But they can see the difference.
but they can see their difference.
Yeah. Right.
I feel like that's what therapy should be like. And however, unfortunately, you just see a lot of examples like that. And so for me, the question is, of course, you know, we've kind of talked about you as the client going in. What is your intention?
Sure.
What is your goal? Right.
Yeah.
And then as a therapist, I guess my question for you would be like, where is the responsibility of a therapist to be like, hey, I don't think this is working.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like we can't just be in therapy and you're not willing to.
Yeah.
Because therapy is hard. Therapy will push you. It'll make you uncomfortable.
Ideally.
Right.
Yeah.
But one of the things we didn't go through in school as therapists is we didn't go through first of all, we didn't talk about that piece in the disclosure, right?
Yeah.
Right. The disclosure is usually like confidentiality.
Yeah.
And you know
What you say here stays here.
Yeah, what you say stays there. If somebody's getting hurt, I'll need a report, right?
Yeah.
Mandated reporter.
Sure.
But like versus like this is nice. This is my style.
Yeah.
Right. This is what. Are you ready to be involved in this process?
Yeah.
And if not, what happens when it's not working? What are we gonna do about it?
Yeah,
What do we do when it's not working?
So I think that's a huge part that doesn't get addressed enough, because I will say that I've absolutely had conversations with clients to where it's like, hey, look, so you said you wanted this initially. Here you are today, and it sounds like you don't want that anymore. So what are we doing here? Because I don't want to waste your time and I don't want to waste mine.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like, but I do want it.
I would say
trying.
Usually,
I'm trying.
I would say usually most clients are just like,
oh yeah.
Well, I think what I would like to do is, and they come up with something else. And it's like, okay,
they'll change
fine,
it up.
So be
okay.
it, right? Mm-hmm. Or sometimes they'll double back and be like, no, I do want that. And that's where, okay, all right, then let's get to work. Show me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And let's follow the treatment plan that we outlined for this. Right? And I would say that's a whole nother thing, because therapy, the reason why it's difficult is actually not even only so much what happens inside the room, but it's really the fact that it's really difficult to employ and follow a treatment plan outside of the room. It's actually really hard.
Yeah.
Like if I say, even let's say something simple like, okay, breathing techniques. If I tell a client, okay, do some breathing techniques, I'd like you to do square breathing count 3, 4, 5 a few times a day. I want you to get good at this so that when you do get anxious, right, and experience bouts of anxiety, you can employ this well. Like we'd call it striking while the iron's cold, right? So that, okay, this is a well-developed skill that I can have, and I'm already good at using it. outside of a time that's stressful. I would say that's not done very often, but it's really important that you do this. 90% of people aren't going to do it. You'll practice it with them.
90%.
But in this way, it's just like PT.
It's like, I forgot my homework.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you go to a physical therapist, and I'm sure that most physical therapists can relate to this idea. You show them lots of techniques. They leave
these stretches every day.
Yes. They don't do a single one. And they come back to you with almost the same thing. And so you do your 6 to 7 sessions that are paid for by their EAP or insurance. Right? But then you're done. And so it's like, well, did it help? I mean, maybe. But it wasn't just the therapist's fault here. Let's be honest. Right? And so, like, I've talked with many a client who have said, well, yeah, I've tried therapy before and it didn't help. And I asked the question, well, were you ready for it too?
Okay, that brings up a whole thing's coming up in my head right now.
Okay,
tell me. Which is okay. So valid to that point, right? There's like maybe it's not the therapist's fault. Some people will go as far to say that it's a systemic issue.
Oh boy, yeah.
Right. That like the fact that I can't even like keep up with this habit is, man, I'm like overstimulated. Like the over consumist capitalist culture, right? Of like we're like maybe I live in a city and just like there's so much around us that maybe our conditions us to not take care of our health, to be in touch with ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, if I can't even keep a habit to do stretches or to do my breathing, like what? Like, is there something more here than just me, you know?
Yeah.
And that's where people will maybe look at the systemic issues, to look at the like the issues beyond themselves.
Yeah, so I think that's where I ask the question. So if someone says, well, I can't even be able to do this, and I would phrase back,
like I have a job, I have to work 2 jobs.
Yeah, so
right?
to the notion of, well, I can't even do this, I would say you haven't been able to yet. Right? I think there will never be an ideal time to start any type of change.
Whoa, okay. I think you have to say that again.
There will never be an ideal time to start any type of change. Right?
Yeah.
There will never be ideal scenarios. There will never be perfect moments. Those don't exist.
Yeah. That's profound, yeah. I feel like that's understanding that in and of itself.
Well, and I think a lot of times we sit and we wait for our feelings to feel right. Right? For everything to feel just right, just so. The sooner we understand that will never take place. And we get up and we accept that something is going to be what it is. And we move. We just start. We don't start fast. We just start. Now, rewinding this back, okay, well, what does all this mean? Right? I think that most often people are very quick to undersell themselves and their capabilities. That's where I would say, okay, yeah, it can be helpful for someone to help them see that, right? But I would also suggest that what is often lacking is their understanding of clear expectations for themselves. So, case in point might be, all right, maybe I'm creating goals that aren't realistic. Like, I want to be able to, say, get in excellent shape, and I want to have 4 kids at the same time, and I also want to be able to cook dinner and get home and make all the meals and clean all the house and also make $250,000 a year and then have 3 dogs and a boat. And like, okay, all of those things are really good. They're not all going to come all at once. I think it's very useful to view things in probability as well. Yeah, you might be able to get in shape. Are you going to run an Ironman? Well, I don't know about that. Let's solve one problem at a time. Right?
Yeah.
So I think
which is a big one. Like I hear that's a huge problem is
Yeah.
that it's not that people lack solutions.
Yes.
Is that they get overwhelmed of
Yes.
like, where do I start?
Well, and
Like,
I think if anything from a systemic perspective has impacted, it's been how much pressure there is placed on achievement, on being noticed, on being seen
Yeah.
for all these things. I believe that we are probably more disconnected than we've ever been, and we're more connected than we've ever been.
Right. It's the paradox of our time.
And what you see is that people are doing all of these things, achieving all of these things, having these types of lives, right? And so then intuitively there's going to be pressure that, am I enough if I don't have that? And I want that. Or there's comparison, right? They say the comparison is the thief of joy.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So again, I think it's extremely important for people to think about, well, what actually do they want? What is realistic?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, what's realistic, right?
You can have things. You can have much. That won't bring you happiness. But I would say the first thing that I hear when people come in most often is, well, I just want to be happy. Well, I tell them, let's think of something else then, because that's never going to happen.
It's like, what? It's like,
well, yeah, and
I thought I came to
right, and it may happen
for that.
momentarily. Sure, great. I hope that happens momentarily. What can happen is we can create environments and situations to where the probability for that happiness happening increases. We brought up Viktor Frankl earlier, but part of Viktor Frankl's big thing was the idea of paradoxical intent. Right.
Paradoxical intent. Okay.
Yes. And
What's
so
that?
just the notion that, okay, it's not by aiming for something that I'm going to achieve it. It's by holding the value for something else. And in the byproduct of that thing, I will achieve what it is that I desire. Right.
Yeah.
So case in point, right. He would use paradoxical intent a lot for, and we may talk about this later in the future too. But he would use paradoxical, like he used several examples, say for helping treat insomnia. And one might say, well, I can't fall asleep no matter how I try. Now, certainly cases for why may vary, right? And severity may also vary too.
Right.
But one of the things that he would utilize is saying, well, stop trying. Right?
Yeah.
Stop trying. Lay down on your pillow and see how long you can keep your eyes open for. Right? The value there, right?
Yeah.
What he was aiming for was to get them to not focus on the anxiety about not sleeping. Because that's typically what happens. We're like, I need to sleep. I can't sleep. I can't sleep.
And then you're anxious
right?
about the
it's like,
fact that you're anxious.
Exactly. It snowballs.
Yeah.
And so he was trying to take the focus off that into a zone that was more streamlined. Right? In a pragmatic way, we might also say, okay, this is the difference between values and goals. Goals are things we can actually achieve. Values are things that we will never achieve. Right?
Values are things that we will never achieve.
That it's impossible to. And it's imperative that you not be able to.
Yes. So you're removing this idea of success or failure. Is that what you're saying?
So no.
Okay.
Because we can still have success towards perhaps a specific goal. But how you measure success would be different. Right.
Okay.
I think,
so can we give you an example?
Yes. So for example,
Like maybe can I give you an example?
Yeah, yes.
So
Yes.
I'm 2025, new year, new me. Fresh.
Happy New Year.
Yeah. Happy New Year. That's right. Trying to be happy. I'm trying to be happy this year. And part of that is I'm single. I want a girlfriend. Someone comes to you and tells that. Like, I want to find a spouse.
Yeah.
This is my goal. How would you apply that?
Let's get some new goals.
New goals. Whoa. Okay. Yeah.
So again, I would say that is not necessarily as fruitful a goal, right? Because it revolves around many factors that you have no control over. You could place yourself in situations that you have high probability to meet someone, but you don't know if that person will come along. And if you do have a goal that says, well, I want to become married in this year, this is what it's going to happen, then oftentimes what happens is you end up taking the person that you probably shouldn't because you're so desperate to meet your goal. Yeah, you met your goal. Now you're miserable.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
I would say the better idea is to say, okay, 2025, I want to work to be as caring, honorable, intelligent, and forthright as possible. I'll never actually achieve these things, but I'm going to work very hard to pursue them constantly. And I'm also going to work to be very interactive with people. So I'm going to surround myself with people that I would like to be around intentionally. Right? Guaranteed, the more you do those things, the right person is going to notice. Because they have values that are the same. Once you encounter that person, and the caveat with this is you never know when that's going to happen.
Right.
So you have to deal with that because you're never
deal with
gonna know
uncertainty.
with that level of uncertainty. But the way you deal with that is pursuing those values.
Yeah.
But finding that individual now means the probability of many happy moments existing and many fulfilling moments, which are even more valuable. So I would say, if your goal is to be with someone, get a new goal.
Get a new goal.
Yeah.
Wow. So, okay. So that's good because I feel like, again, when people come into therapy, they might say that's their goal. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Like, hey, this is why I'm going because maybe there's something wrong with me.
Sure.
That I'm not getting a girlfriend, right?
Sure.
Or maybe I'm,
Which, hey, maybe there is. Right? Maybe there has been character defects that have prevented you from being able to engage in the relationships. But I would suggest that you should fix those, not so that you can have a relationship, but just so that you can be a better person. And in that path of being a better person, being in a relationship will become immensely more accessible.
So would you say then that, because I think what you're saying here is like kind of detaching from the outcome per se, in the sense that you can't control it. Then how do we apply that to the therapeutic space, right? Because I feel like even when people come in with, like, maybe they have depression or something, they're like, I need this outcome. I need to feel better.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But otherwise it's not working.
Yeah.
It's not working.
So,
right? How do you help people come up with a good mindset to enter therapy so that we're not already setting ourselves up for failure?
Sure.
In the sense of like, oh, I need this to be the outcome of therapy.
Well, I think,
otherwise this doesn't work.
Well, so I think that in and of itself is the outcome that's setting them up for failure. Right?
Yeah.
So partly what we're doing initially is tweaking the lens to say, okay, because typically how they're going to measure whether or not they're depressed or not is, well, do they feel happy? Right. And I would say that, hey, the sooner that we can get our metrics off of how we feel and on to what we value and what we continually pursue, right, and how we emulate those values and carry those out towards the things that matter to us, the greater probability it is that we will vicariously have the emotions and feelings that we desire. So I would say that's the conversation that's had initially, right? Well, so tell me about your values. Tell me about the things that are important to you. What are you doing for those? Because those are the fertilizer.
The fertilizer. Right? I like that. Yeah.
Those are the things that enrich and provide the right environment for all these emotions that you say you desire.
That's interesting, right? Because it's this idea that therapy is where we talk about our feelings.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, about that.
But like, about that. Okay, whoa. Because that's a big one, right? It's like this therapy is where we talk about our feelings, and this is where we feel and we talk about our feelings.
Well, no, I would say that.
And that, again, that's one of the criticisms from the book Bad Therapy.
Sure.
Is that these kids are just talking about their feelings.
Yeah.
They end up navel gazing, looking at themselves.
Sure, 100%.
Instead of kind of being able to
Step outside of
engage
themselves.
and present themselves in the world in a way that's functional.
Yeah. No, and I would.
So is that then the problem of the therapist? Because the kids are not doing
I would
that
say
necessarily.
Well, I would say it's twofold. So I would say the problem with a therapist is actually, because I would say most therapists would be able to articulate and say, yeah, it seems like they do this a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
Like agree.
Yeah. Well,
that is a problem.
Yeah. I would say they may agree that it's a problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So now I'm sure that there would be some that would say, well, no, they need to be able to allow to express their emotions, and that would decrease it, right? Because there was a school of thought that maybe that was a good idea.
Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong. To a point, there is something to be said for being able to put language to something. Being able to say, okay, I do feel this way, right? But what you do after that, I would suggest, is vitally important. Yes, own your emotion. Own how you feel. Now own that it's your responsibility to do something about that. Right? Absolutely feel.
Yeah.
Right? I would suggest absolutely. Like, without feelings, we wouldn't be able to have so many of the beautiful things that we do in this world, like music. Right? So much raw emotion has been poured out in music over centuries. Right? That's huge.
Yeah. Music is not music without emotion.
Exactly. But I would also argue that music is the genuine beneficial product of emotion having utility.
Woo. Yes.
Right. So it's
channeling those emotions.
Exactly. Do something with it. Right? Do something productive with it so it doesn't haunt you and it doesn't need to replay in your mind over and over. Right.
So would you say just like simply processing that? Is that
well? So processing, I think that's a funny word. Right?
That's a big word in therapy, right?
Yes. I'm an external processor. I just need to process. I just need to say it, right?
Right. I need to sit with it.
Sit with it, right? I would suggest sitting with it is a bigger deal, and making sure that we have responsibility now to do something with it.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So in this processing, there should still be a value that leads how we process that thing.
Interesting. Okay.
Right. So if I say, I just need to go and I have to just tell my parents what I think of them.
Because I feel that. I feel that.
Yeah, I just feel that.
Express myself.
Yeah, I just have to express myself.
Yeah. Self-expression.
I have a voice.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, yes, that may be true. But if in your self-expression, you are utilizing values that are terrible, that's not right. Right? That's wrong. Right? Now your emotions are trumping your values.
Right.
And that's just going to leave you feeling empty and resentful and even more frustrated because they didn't understand you and they got mad at you. Right?
Yeah.
Because you weren't respectful. You weren't nice. You weren't even caring when you said what you said. Right? So it's one thing if I say I need to express. It's another if I say, yeah, I need to express. But it's my responsibility to do this in a way that's actually going to benefit me. And if it's actually not going to benefit that other person, if it's going to really inflict some serious pain on them, then that may need to be something that I evaluate. Right?
Right.
And so I think, yes, express your emotions, but determine what you're going to do with that.
And so I guess the question is if that conversation is being had in the therapy room, especially with kids at least.
Yeah.
Right? Because
well, littles are a whole different story.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So that's okay. So you'd say that when you're talking about kids, it's different.
I would say with kids, the other challenge there is that we're trying to get them to understand how, because they're going to feel everything. And so a lot of the pieces there are impulse control in general.
Okay. I see.
Right, because you have
have
a forming brain.
Yeah.
Right, and it will be continually forming for the rest, for the next 30 years.
Yeah.
Right. So
would you say like even like processing to a certain extent for kids is like a big...
I think being able to simply label emotion, I think that's extremely important. Right? Mad, sad, glad, happy.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Okay, yeah, let's be able to label those. So you can put a label on it. So when you feel these emotions. But the reason that we need to know when we feel them is so that we also then know, okay, here's what we do with him now. Right? I can recognize that I feel this way. I can also recognize now what I'm going to do. I can recognize that I feel angry. I know that I feel angry, but I'm not going to do the next right thing. And I can recognize that that's very difficult. And I can feel good that I just did a hard thing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think in some ways, what I see, the conversations I've had with like younger therapists, is, and even some of the literature I've read, is there is a hesitation to challenge. Right? Like I feel like challenging is hard.
Yeah.
Because even in our culture today, right? We live in a pretty polarized culture. People are angry at each other
All the time.
yeah, and so of course therapists are like, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that. I don't, you know. But at the same time, it's like we don't know how do we challenge in a way that's friendly, in a sense that
Sure.
being able to be like, yeah, you can feel that way, but also, right? Holding two things can be true, and so it's like, oh, okay, validate, go home. We didn't really learn anything.
Yeah.
You know?
No, not at all. So I help me understand. What's your question there? Or is that a statement?
Well, I'm like, yeah. Well, I think it's a statement in the sense, like, I think to a certain extent, some therapists are not being trained how to
provide appropriate confrontation.
Yeah. So, like, one example is exposure therapy.
Sure.
So, exposure therapy is usually given to, like, clients dealing with anxiety, right? Like, I fear OCD. Yeah. Like, maybe like I fear
exposure response prevention.
Yeah, exactly. Like, maybe like I'm scared of.
Yeah. Works great.
Yeah. I'm scared of going to a certain social setting. Maybe I'm scared of driving. I fear driving because I was in an accident, right? Or like, so exposure therapy is like you're being exposed to that thing that's making you anxious.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
From what I've read, that is it's not only hard for clients to learn that, but it's hard for therapists to administer that, because you have to sit with the discomfort as well.
Yes.
As the therapist, because you're pushing your client to a space where they might even be like, "Oh, this is too much for me."
Might freak out.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, let's deal with more
I think
tamer
techniques.
techniques.
I think part of the element to that too is if you have, depending on the client that you're working with, if they're larger than you, if they're stronger than you, right? You have some elements there that, hey, maybe
Safety.
you're a little bit, a little bit concerned with. Now, I think generally speaking, though, that is the therapist then doing their work to be able to be more comfortable with that level of discomfort. I think ideally, therapy in a nutshell is learning to be comfortable with discomfort. Anything that can do that for you, great. If it's not therapy, awesome.
Wow.
Hopefully therapy does that, though. Right? And hopefully in therapy, you can provide that stimulus and response. Right?
And in that sense, I don't think we're over-therapizing that of therapy.
That is not over-therapized.
No.
It's not therapized enough.
Yeah. Right.
Right?
Yeah. No, that's 100%.
Yeah.
100%. Wow. Okay. Cool. No, that's good.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, like, yeah, I'm gained a lot from that discussion, because I think that as more people get therapy, understanding what it is that they are expecting going in, how they can prepare themselves for going in, so we can actually extract the most out of it.
Yeah.
Right at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Because I think the issue is that we talk about therapy, we use therapy speak in social media and everything, but we're not actually talking about therapy.
Sure.
In the ways we've discussed, at least today.
Yeah.
Getting uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Having that one-on-one discussion with your therapist, right?
Yeah.
So we have ideas about it, just like Hollywood.
Yeah.
Gives us pictures of romantic relationships, but it might not actually meet the real thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think, having said all of this, it's certainly not to say that there isn't a place for people just to be able to go in and tell their story.
Oh yeah, I think that's part of it too. Right?
I believe that that's essential.
Yeah.
So I want it to be well understood that
Yeah.
no, I believe there's a vital role to that. And I believe there's still a vital role to people being heard. But I think sometimes what they get lost in is believing the lies that they tell themselves. I will certainly, hopefully, be the first to say that I have lied to myself. And I'm good at it if I'm not careful.
Yeah, really good at it. Yeah.
Right. But I believe that people need to understand that across the board about themselves. Like the moment that we think that we'd never be capable of something is the moment I would suggest that we're probably at the highest risk for it. Right. Because let's understand the sad truth, and that's that people in general are capable of terrible things.
Yeah. Yeah.
The more we understand that, the greater we can do to prevent terrible things. But that's in some ways another podcast.
Yeah. Oh no, it's good. Yeah. No, hearing is being able to tell your story, having that listening ear, I think is like crucial, right? Like definitely not denying that.
No.
It's like it's both and.
Yes.
Right. It's both
Yes.
and. Yeah.
Good.
Sweet.
Awesome.
All right.
Is that a wrap?
It's a wrap.
All done.
Till next time.
Until next time.